Hello, my name is Sophie. I'm a PhD student at the University of Aberdeen, and I'm going to talk about fascist models for aeolian systems and rift basins. Before I start, I would like to thank Winter Sardea and my supervisors for making this project possible, and I'm going to dive right in with why we started building fascist models. So a large part of my PhD project is trying to understand the distribution of aeolian deposits within a subsurface half-graben in the German Rotliegend. Seismic in this area is very limited, as is the number of wells, and therefore just using field data makes it very difficult to determine where the aeolian system begins within the basin. So where does the dune field center lie? Where does the margin begin? And generally just to locate where we have larger dunes and smaller dunes. This is important, however, because we can see a correlation between thick areas where we have a lot of thick dunes and large dunes and good permeability and production, and areas where we have thinner dunes and fewer dunes and less permeability and less good production. And so this is quite important, but very difficult to understand the distribution of the fascies just from field data. So we turned to modern analogs and conceptual models, and the observations we make here will hopefully help us to build better subsurface models. So when choosing the right modern analogs, we looked for basins that were similar to our subsurface basin. So in that case, that meant finding arid rift basins that contain active aeolian dune fields. And we chose two main study areas that matched these criteria. The first was in Southern California, and the second one was in Western Mongolia and in some neighboring Chinese provinces. So here on the right, you can see the Mongolian sands, so that is number 3 here. And this is a large dune field with an axial fluvial system. That is the blue polygon, and that's diverted by these large sand masses and flows north and then along the basin axis. So our second area is the very arid Southern California in the US. The blue shaded shapes here are basins filled with alluvial fans, fluvial and playa lake deposits, and the brown, yellow and orange shapes represent the basins containing aeolian deposits. So as aeolian deposits kind of include everything from flat sand sheet deposits to large complex dunes, we divided our aeolian deposits into 5 main groups based on dune size, type and complexity. Fascies 1 is dominated by sand sheet deposits and simple and single dunes. Fascies 3 contains some compound dunes, and Fascies 5 is dominated by large compound dunes and complex dunes that can be several kilometers wide. To show that again here, you can see the ranges of the dune sizes within the different fascies based on measurements from satellite images. So we measure dune length and width perpendicular to each other, and you can see the sizes increasing as the number of fascies increases as well. So after sorting our dunes into our 5 groups, we then calculated the areas covered by the different fascies in all 24 studied basins. We added up all the aerial coverage of all the fascies and calculated the average proportion of fascies within the basin. And you can see here that about 30% almost of the area in the basin is covered by aeolian deposits, and the rest is just fluvial deposits, alluvial fans, alluvial plain deposits, and playa and lacustrine deposits. And here you can see the ranges of the different fascies, and you can see that the range for fluvial alluvial deposits is quite large. So generally that the proportion is quite high, but we can also have basins where there are almost no alluvial or fluvial deposits. So if we then just focus on the aeolian fascies, a third or 40% is made up of sand sheet deposits and small single dunes. You can see that here, and the second largest group are compound dunes. And in general, every dune field we studied contained fascies 1 and 2, and then when there was a larger sand supply, we would have larger dunes and compound dunes, which would be fascies 3 to 5. So now some general observations that we included in our conceptual models. The dune transport direction tends to be parallel or subparallel to the main fault or the graben orientation. There were only few basins where the dominant transport direction was kind of oblique to the graben orientation. So that would be these up here, where the difference in angle was 40 or 50%, 40 or 50 degrees, sorry. And then next, what I mentioned already is that dune size increases towards the dune field center. And then what also heavily controls the distribution of aeolian deposits seems to be the alluvial drainage and the sand supply to the basin. So in the middle, you can see an example for a basin with little aeolian coverage, and you can see the lobe shape of the alluvial fan still preserved. And then here in this area, we have a larger supply of aeolian sand, and the bases of the alluvial fans are being reworked by aeolian processes and kind of form a line kind of parallel to the graben orientation as well, or the mountain range orientation. So next, with our fascies change, we can also have a change in dune transport direction. You can see here that jumps quite significantly from fascies 3 to 5. And we also have quite narrow transition zones between the fascies, which actually made it easier to draw these polygons here on the left. So here we only have a distance of 500 meters, and if we zoom into over there, we only have a distance of 70 meters between dunes of fascies 2 and a river deposit. So all modern analogues varied not only in the amount of sand available for aeolian transport, but also in the height of the local water table and how much water influx there was into the basin. So to quantify this, we looked at drainage areas as a proxy for water influx. And with ArcGIS, you can derive drainage areas and flow patterns from digital elevation maps. And so this would be a digital elevation map, and the drainage areas are these black polygons here. So we then subtracted the area of the rift basin from the drainage area, divided that by the area of the rift basin, and we got a ratio of external drainage area to rift basin size. And this is the number that is independent of basin size. So we can then use this number to compare our basins, and we plotted the drainage area ratio against the proportion of aeolian sand within the basin. And you can see that there's a general correlation between a low drainage area ratio and a high proportion of aeolian sand, and a high drainage area ratio and a low proportion of aeolian sand. But in general, most of the rift basins in our study had quite a local drainage which you can see at the drainage area ratio that's mainly at 0 to 2, and then we only have a few basins where the drainage area ratio is larger. So to combine our two main controls that we had, so drainage and aeolian coverage, we built 4 main conceptual models. So this is a conceptual model for a basin with limited drainage and large aeolian coverage. You can see the femoral axial fluvial system here. You can also see aeolian reworking of alluvial fans over here. And then we have our dunes increasing in size and complexity towards the dune field center. An example for this would be the calcer dunes in California. We have here the small transverse ridges surrounding the complex star dunes. So again, increase in size towards the dune field center. Our second conceptual model is one that shows us an example for limited drainage and limited aeolian coverage. We are showing here 3 possibilities where we can have accumulations of aeolian sand. So first we can have dune accumulation in front of an intrabasinal high here. Then we can have some zybers reworking alluvial fans. So we mainly found them on the hanging wall, but we can probably have them here as well. And then the last possibility where we can have aeolian dunes is kind of in the middle of the basin, where the dunes are parallel to the main graben orientation. And an example for this would be the Cadiz dunes in California. Here you can see that they are relatively small. The largest dune type that we have are transverse dunes, And an example with even less aeolian sand would be the Wonder Valley. We have some here, you have some reworking of the alluvial fans. So you have some xybars up here. So our last conceptual model is a model for large drainage and limited aeolian coverage. You have a large lake here in the middle of the basin, an axial-fluvial system. Parts of our dune field can be separated from the rest of the dune field by some rivers. We can have some vegetated and stabilized dunes here, and damp interdunes even in the dune field center. So an example for this would be the dune field near Lake Halahu in China. Here you can see the big river system, and here's some isolated dunes and sand sheets. Our last conceptual model is a basin showing a large drainage system and a large aeolian coverage. We have a large axial fluvial system here that can actually cut through the dune field, and we can have both damp and wet interdunes here and here, but also dry interdunes where the amount of sand outweighs the drainage. We also can have some vegetated dunes at the margins that are kind of stabilized by the vegetation. So an example for this would be the Kumkul Basin in China, and you can see here you have a lake right in the middle of the basin and then large dunes right next to it. So to summarize, dunes increase in size and complexity towards the field center. On average, about 50% of aeolian facies are sand sheets and small dunes. Every dune field is surrounded by sand sheets that we studied, and the long axis of a dune field is generally parallel to the main fold. We have narrow transition zones, and small drainage area ratios correlate with a large proportion of aeolian sand. Thank you so much, and please ask away.